The Alternate by P.E. Rowe. Zach Deals was on mile 19 when he veered off course. He didn't notice, both because there wasn't a proper trail on the far side of the ridge, but also because he wasn't thinking clearly anymore, and he didn't recognize it. Zach was an experienced ultra-runner, but that wasn't his occupation, nor even a passion, nor was it a hobby. He took running far too seriously to call it that. Zach Deals was an astronaut. Running was what he did when he wasn't at work. The route he'd planned for the morning after he'd gotten the Cataract's decision was a grueling 35-mile mountain grind that he'd been scouting for several months. And when he got the news that Eno Clark had been selected for the Cataract's crew instead of him, Zach decided the time was right. A long run was the perfect way to get the bad news out of his system. But when he'd gotten the news the night before, it was too late in the day to start the Austin Ridge, as he'd named the off-trail terrain run. He'd left at 6 a.m. from one of the dirt roads behind the airport, bringing only his hydration pack, his watch, a change of socks stuffed behind his water pouch, sunglasses, a hat, and an aggressive timeline to get him back to his car before the sun got too high and hot. It didn't go to plan from the start. The climb up the front face of Mount Austin was much tougher than Zach expected, and even though he didn't push for the summit, skirting around the peak across the southern shoulder before heading north, he was still dragging after the climb. The stretch between Mount Austin and Railroad Ridge should have been a 50-minute uphill jog, but when he missed that mark by over 20 minutes, the red flags were there. But Zach already had a bad taste in his mouth from the Cataract's decision. He determined he was not quitting on the run, too. He would get his legs under him on the first descent, before making the turn back under a strong rebound. 2 hours later, he was walking, and he had no idea where he was. He also wasn't sure what he was doing, but he kept walking, slowly. He'd only stopped running when he experienced the sudden, startling realization that he didn't know where he was, what he was doing, or why. His head was hot. His hydro pack was empty, and there was nothing recognizable around him. Zach was walking slowly down into the valley, thinking that it would lead somewhere, to a road and maybe a car, but there was nothing out there. The sandy flats around Dixie Valley were entirely vacant. At 9:37, Zach's watch chirped. His watch? "Zach, are you okay?" It was a woman's voice, a friendly one. "Who's this?" he said, holding up his wrist in front of his mouth. "It's Badgley, Zach. Where are you?" "I'm at your place. I came by to check on you." "Oh, yeah?
What are you doing, Zach?"
"Running. I'm not sure where I am."
"You don't have your phone with you?"
"I'm not sure."
"You've got your watch on, though."
"I'm talking into it. I'm not sure what's happening. Who am I talking to?"
"It's Badgley, Zach. Hang on. Are you running?"
She could hear the confusion in his voice. Something was off. The uncertain, wavering tone wasn't the Zach Deals she knew. "I'm running. Yeah."
"Stop running, Zach, okay? You don't sound right."
"I'm not running anymore. I'm just trying to walk somewhere."
"Okay. Stay right where you are. I'm going to find you."
Badgley Pinion had met Zach at Atlas IPS 6 months prior. She was a candidate to be a flight technician, and Zach Deals, of all the people there at Atlas, had taken an interest in her and made her feel welcome. She'd had a key to his apartment for 3 months now. She pulled up a map on his TV through her own phone, finding Zach's watch in the middle of nowhere. She'd expected to find him at home that morning, probably in a bad mood after hearing about cataracts. He hadn't said anything to her about the run when they'd texted the night before.
"Zach, can you tell me what you see?"
she asked, trying to confirm the watch's location from his description of the landscape. It didn't make any sense that he would be out there. Zach wasn't making any sense either. After a few minutes, Badgley decided that he was, in fact, out in that isolated valley, and he was dangerously disoriented. He didn't know where he was, and she had no confidence that she could talk him back to his car. In Badgley's mind, there was no choice. There was a mountain rescue out in Fallon. Within 40 minutes, Zach was in a helicopter getting fluids, and he still had no idea where he was or what was happening to him. Zach came to his senses again as they were triaging him at the hospital. He had a dull headache and complained of being hot. They'd given him an ice pack to put on his head and were running fluids wide open. The first thing he asked was how he'd gotten there. "Have I been in an accident?" he asked them. "Nah, buddy," the paramedic told him. "You bonked on a run." He'd been running hard, sweating hard, and he'd tried to push through a hard stretch during a long, tough run. And then he'd bonked. The story, as he got it from the doctors, was that he'd been picked up wandering in the desert, and when he asked them how they'd found him out there, they told Zach that his girlfriend had called it in and saved his life. "My girlfriend?" he asked them. "Badgley called for help?" She was on her way. It was a good drive into Reno, so Zach had some time to think as he sat on the stretcher, watching fluids drip from a bag to a line running into his veins. It was not good. Ending up in the hospital wasn't the problem. The problem was the rescue. He'd never be able to keep that from Atlas, and they would not like this. One of their astronauts, disoriented, needing to be rescued 5 miles from a major highway. The longer Zach sat there, the worse he felt. Part of it was sensation coming back to him, the heat of his body, the low-level throbbing of the head. The other part was the fallout. Zach imagined that he'd given the personnel office a very hard choice for cataracts, and ultimately, they'd chosen Eno Clark over him. Now, the very next day, he'd validated that choice for them. Poor judgment, poor risk management, poor decisions. They diagnosed it as severe dehydration and moderate heat stroke, and they told him there was no reason he couldn't be discharged after a few hours of observation, once he'd returned to his baseline. By then, Badgley would be there. He wasn't looking forward to that ride back to Lander. That wouldn't be a pleasant trip at all. From the moment she arrived at the hospital, she struggled to get a read on Zach. Badgley Pignon couldn't find his phone because it was in his car, and Zach couldn't control his car remotely from his watch. So he did need a ride, and she wanted to see him to make sure he was okay. Zach Deals was an intense person, but he normally wasn't moody or angry. She didn't expect him to be happy, but she wasn't expecting the cold shoulder she perceived from his reticence and body language. And it was difficult for Badgley to tell whether his manner was the result of the physical fallout from the misadventure in the desert, but to her it felt like something else, something heavier. "I have to pick up my phone and my car," Zach said, as she escorted him into her car. "It's out by the mountain behind the airport. You can probably ping it."
"It's fine, Zach. We can swing by and pick it up."
"Or you could drop me off there." She paused, trying to read his face.
"I'd planned on taking you home, making sure you're all right."
"You've done enough," Zach replied, sitting across from her, and then lying with his legs extended along the length of the seats. "I've already wrecked your day too, I'm sure." She didn't quite know how to take it. Badgley looked across at him as the car started. He shut his eyes. She wasn't sure whether it was exhaustion or the desire to shut her out. "I was thinking," she said, and her tone signaled that it wasn't an idle thought. Not about dinner or getting together later in the week. "We should talk later," Zach replied. "I'm not feeling great right now."
"I can't talk tomorrow. I'm on rotation, and personnel will be in the office on Monday. I don't know what your schedule is, but they're probably going to find out about this, Zach."
He didn't look up. He pulled his elbow up over his face, covering his eyes and the crook of his arm. "They're definitely going to find out about it."
"I'm not going to tell them anything that isn't true, Zach, but I don't have to say everything. I could just tell them I was being cautious. I wouldn't be lying about that."
"Don't. Trust me. I know Atlas better than you. Tell them exactly what happened, Badgley. They'll pull the reports from the medics anyway. You do know we've signed waivers on all our medical records, right?"
"I didn't think of that."
"I was disoriented. They'll think you did the right thing. At least one of us can come out of the situation looking better."
"Really? You think this looks good for me?"
"Why wouldn't it?"
"Would you open your eyes and look at me, please, Zach? This is important."
Zach Deals winced. The sun was still high enough in the afternoon sky that he didn't much care to stare straight into it. "This is why I didn't want to talk," he said, turning toward her and pulling his arm away from his face.
"They don't know we're seeing each other,"
she stated. "Who? Personnel?"
"Anybody. I haven't told anyone at work yet."
"So what?" Zach asked. "There are 2 married couples on cataracts." One up on Mongolo right now. Of course we're going to see other people at work. Where the hell else are we going to meet people? We both work 80 hours a week, Badgley. In the middle of the desert.
I was just asking. Because, I don't know. Maybe I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. Like maybe I could have one thing they don't know about. How'd you get into my house? And why were you stopping by on a Saturday morning anyway? The key you gave me. And I was checking to see how you were dealing with the cataracts announcement. Not that well, Zach, as it turns out.
You see my point, he replied, turning and pulling his arm over his head again. If they didn't know already, they'll know now.
That we're together?
That you have a key to my house, Badgley. What do you want me to say?
Maybe thank you would be a start? Sorry to scare you like that? I messed up, maybe?
I had a bad run, Badgley. I bonked. Dehydration. I'm sure I'll have to say anything personnel wants to hear 1,000 times for the next however long they make it a problem. I don't even know if this is salvageable. So please, this is exactly why I didn't want to talk about it.
So I should have let you wander around in the desert, Zach?
You could have come get me. You're here now anyway.
You were incoherent, and I was an hour and a half away from the road down there. You were in the middle of nowhere.
I'm not going to say you were wrong for calling rescue, Badgley, but it's a problem now.
Not as big a problem as passing out from heat stroke in the desert an hour from help, and hoping your watch alerts in time. That would have been a bigger problem. And no, I wasn't thinking about your career or mine when I called rescue. I called because I care about you, Zach Deals.
The rest of the ride out to Zach's car passed quietly, just the sound of the road humming under the car's wheels. He thanked Badgley for the ride when they got to Zach's car out on that dirt road behind the airport. They didn't make plans for later in the week. Zach was not surprised to get the notice in his inbox first thing on Monday. He was slotted in for 9:45, and he wasn't to report to campus before then. He'd met Tess Lazaro a few times, but he'd only ever seen the psychologist to assess baseline mission fitness. Dr. Lazaro was a therapist. She was the one you saw when Atlas IPS had questions about you. Or worse than that, they didn't have questions, just doubts. That wasn't a category Zach Deals had ever found himself in before. Not in school, not in college, not in the professional world. Zach Deals was doubtless. He'd seen her at mixers, holiday parties, and the like, and she'd always looked nice. She was dark-haired, trim, early 40s, he guessed, and she looked at you directly, the way Zach did. He could tell when she invited him to sit in the chair across from her that there would be no dancing around anything, like looking at a human lie detector. Have you talked to Badgley yet? He asked her. Tess Lazaro nodded.
She had to go out early. And I should just say before we begin, Zach, that this isn't an issue yet. We just want to clear a few things up.
If it's not an issue, then what am I doing here?
As I said, you're here to clear things up. It could be a good thing long term.
He looked back at her doubtfully. What exactly do we need to clear up?
You've probably figured out what personnel wants to know. Whether that incident Saturday morning had anything to do with the cataracts news. And things like that aren't always easy to figure out.
No, it's an easy enough answer. I had a bad run. Bonked was the term the medics used. And I got dehydrated, and I needed a little help getting back to my car.
Do you believe that?
She looked at Zach the way he figured she would. I can see why the question is being asked, he replied. Nothing like that has ever happened before that Atlas knows about. And then the day after the cataracts news, I end up disoriented in the desert. Statistically improbable, right?
You said that Atlas knows about, Zach. Has it happened to you before? A similar incident the company isn't aware of?
Not quite that severe. I got pretty dizzy 3 years ago during the Badwater. But there are people there, race staff, so I was able to nip it in the bud and keep going.
You finished?
22nd place.
Why do you run ultras, Zach?
I like running.
No.
Dr. Lazaro grinned back at him.
I like running. I still do about 12 miles a week. I used to do 20, but you get into your 40s, especially after 2 pregnancies. My feet aren't what they used to be, so my knees aren't either. I understand the pull of it, though. The escapism. People don't do ultras to escape, though, Zach. You either do them to test your limits or punish yourself. Which one are you?
I haven't thought about it that deeply. She looked at him intently. That human lie detector. A little of both, maybe? He added.
You know what I do, right?
Tess Lazaro asked. What, apart from this?
That's not what I mean. Like, how I got this job. Why Atlas hired me.
Presumably you're well qualified.
Yeah, but what makes one especially qualified to ask astronauts the right questions when situations like this come up?
Training?
I spent 18 years working with top professional athletes, Zach. Before this, the Raiders and Knights. Before that, the Rams and Lakers. Alpha competitors. So astronauts aren't all that mysterious to me. A different breed of the same species. What's sort of unique about you is that you're a kind of alpha in two domains. The work, obviously, and how you relax when you're away from the work, by running your body to absolute exhaustion. And you've been doing it long enough to have a good idea of where your limits are. So why did you bonk on that run to the point Badgley had to call a helicopter to pull you out of Dixie Valley? That's the question we need to answer.
Isn't that a bit of an overreaction? Respectfully, Dr. Lazaro. It was hot. I got dehydrated. It's a mistake every ultra runner makes at least a couple times in their life.
Maybe. That very well could be. But I'd like you to consider something else before we get too deep into this. Atlas's perspective.
I know. They don't want to have questions about someone they're sending on a 3-year Mars mission.
No, actually. It's the opposite. They want to know what questions they're dealing with. Everyone has issues, Zach. You think they don't have questions about Eno Clark? About Jimena Leon? Michelle Monarch? Leo Dans? You're all alphas.
And you all have alpha problems.
Atlas doesn't like mysteries down here because they don't like surprises up there. They'd like me to help you work through what kind of alpha you are. I'd like for you to think of this as an opportunity to figure that out, rather than a blemish on a spotless record.
That's not really how I think, Dr. Lazaro.
Call me Tess, please. We've got a little work to do then, Zach. Shockingly, tough people are tough.
Call me Deals, Tess, he answered reluctantly. I'll do whatever I have to do.
That's the truest thing you've said so far, Deals. That's good. Let's talk about running a bit.
Zach Deals spent the rest of the hour talking with Tess Lazaro about his history with running. He never quite rose high enough to be an elite runner at the top levels, but he was competitive from the time he started cross-country in high school. He was the top varsity runner from his sophomore year, and by his senior year, he was a conference champion with scholarship offers. In college, he took a similar upward trajectory, but Zach never quite cracked the top 20 in his division, never got invited to the major championships, and was never the top runner on his team. But to compete at that level in itself was impressive. And when he'd reached his ceiling within the collegiate ranks, Zach migrated toward road races of differing lengths, where he could excel. And progressively, these lengths got longer and longer. He found himself seeking out marathons as a graduate student, as well as long-distance triathlons, and then, finally, ultramarathons. And as Zach talked Tess through all those choices he made to continue running through all those different phases of his young life, she continued to ask the same question. What did running do for you during that time? And then she asked him the question they really needed to answer. Why did he decide to attack the Austin Ridge Loop the morning after he'd gotten the bad news about cataracts? Zach didn't have a single answer. The best he could come up with was that he wanted to do something big to wash out the bad taste of the bad news.
What was the big mistake?
She asked him.
In the granular sense. In other words, what would you do differently if you had to attempt it again, Zach?
He thought about it from a performance standpoint. He'd slept poorly because of the news. He also probably wasn't properly hydrated at the start. He didn't eat properly either. He'd expected the uphill start to the shoulder to be grueling, and it was, but he'd also expected to recover more on the traverse to Railroad Ridge. But that was a tougher stretch than he'd expected, much more steep than flat, which meant he never really recovered from the first climb. In retrospect, his goal time-wise was too ambitious through that stretch, and he shouldn't have pushed that hard to hit that benchmark. He also should have started earlier in the morning. He'd burned through too much fluid far too fast. Lots of mistakes.
On how many of those mistakes did you opt in?
She asked him. That was an interesting question. Zach's knee-jerk response was to say that by definition the answer was all of them. After all, he'd made every decision. To run in the first place. To start too late. To push too hard too early. To ignore his body when it told him he was going too hard. All of them. But that also left him with an uncomfortable conclusion. That he'd done it to himself. She tried to give Zach an assignment. She asked him to think about what running offered him when it all went right. He had the answer before she had the chance to end the session. Easy, he told her. I get an excuse to focus explicitly on the run. To escape from work, from life, from everything else. I get to just run.
Okay, Tess told him. New assignment. However long the next run you had planned was going to be, you're going to set aside that same amount of time and go for a walk instead. No music, no specific distance or goal, no thinking about work. Just walk deals. Then we'll talk about that when we meet again.
After the appointment, Atlas cut him loose for the day. He hadn't planned on that. The temptation to run that afternoon was almost overwhelming. Zach wasn't sure whether Tess had meant for him to get right into it and take that walk immediately, but he figured if she'd wanted him to wait, she'd have said so explicitly. After all, she'd said it herself. He was an astronaut. And if you wanted an astronaut to give something time before diving in, you have to tell him. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what else to do with himself but the work. So Zach picked a trail, got in his car, and headed down the 278 toward Eureka. There was a stretch of Pony Express trail that ran into the hills and offered isolation just as complete as his Austin Ridge loop. He'd run the pony a few times for various distances, only ever running into riders on horseback a time or two. Other than that, no one came out there. No goals, Zach told himself as he stepped away from the road into the dusty rolling hills. It was late afternoon, and it was hot. The sun was still bright, but the clouds were gathering, and according to his watch, he had a couple hours before a line of developing thunderstorms might bring a rare bit of measurable rain. A couple hours was about the right amount of time. Walking was harder than he expected. It wasn't as though he didn't do it every day, but walking was never the point. It was the way to get from one point to another. The first thing Zach realized was that walking wasn't the point here either. Thinking was the point. Or maybe not thinking was the point. After all, that was what he ran for, really. To have that excuse to think about something other than his career. The first thought was that the desolation of the landscape was a sight to behold. It wasn't particularly beautiful out there, but there was a certain beauty in it. It was usually dry as hell in the desert, which made the feel of the moisture in the air all the more striking a contrast. The blue of the sky in the afternoon became a dull gray gradually, yet seemingly, suddenly all at once. Zach walked for about a half hour before he found himself along a rolling ridge of scrubland, looking out across a long desert plain. Stupid risks. That's what Atlas couldn't tolerate about the way he'd ended up in that helicopter. And, with each step, the truth became clearer and clearer to him. He'd only taken those risks because he'd let his emotions get the better of him. He'd been angry about the Cataric's decision. Zach had a better CV than Eno Clark. He had qualifications on more of the systems they'd be operating on MBA, and he was a more seasoned flight technician as well. So yeah, he was angry that morning, and he took it out on the only person in the equation he had control over, Zach Deals. That was why he'd gone so hard up that first ascent, because it hurt, and he liked that it hurt. So yeah, Tess Lazaro, you're goddamn right I was punishing myself. That's what failure deserved. Only Zach always chose to opt into a punishment that was ultimately constructive. Running didn't break him down. It hurt, but it was the type of hurt that made him sharper and harder and stronger. It was constructive punishment. He'd just overdone it a little. A decision like that, though, on a mission, couldn't be tolerated. Choices had to be made with cool heads, data, input from ops, and careful collaboration with the entire chain of command. You didn't get to be angry about an outcome on Mars. Sulking, grumbling, popping off at team members. None of that was useful in the field. And nobody wanted to walk on eggshells around a coworker anywhere. Not on Earth, not on a spaceship, not on another planet. Zach knew that. He also knew that he'd used running as a way to be a better coworker. That was one of the reasons he'd always had high marks as a team member. But he could see that it also might become a problem on Mars if he didn't find an alternative outlet. He'd bottle up his negativity and empty it all out on a run the second he punched out in the evening. That was tougher to do on missions. He'd already had that experience on Luna. What he'd never had was a disappointment as big as Cataract's. Not on a mission or anywhere else in his life. He was going to have to deal with that. Zach was coming to another crest along the ridge when he hit the hour mark. And as he looked out over the scrublands, he couldn't help but notice how dark the clouds were getting. He could taste the moisture gathering in the air now. There were lightning bursts in the dark gray clouds on the horizon. It was time to turn back. Badgley. That's what he thought about as he made his way back to the car at a fast walk. Zach was half thinking about whether he'd beat the rain and half thinking about how he was going to frame his apology. In Zach's mind, the difference between a friend or coworker and a partner was that you didn't put any of your baggage on coworkers or friends. You'd swallow frustrations, smooth things over for the team, carry more than your expected weight always. Partners were different. You couldn't always give them the best of you. In Zach's case, that had gone both ways in all of his relationships, but usually not very early on. That wasn't the case with Badgley. He'd felt perfectly comfortable treating her like a partner from the start. He didn't know whether she was swallowing her own set of frustrations on his behalf, but Zach wasn't with Badgley. He'd already been relying on her, and maybe she just didn't realize it yet, but he was prepared for her to do the same. It just hadn't happened yet. Maybe he didn't even need to say it. Maybe it would just happen now that he'd crossed so far beyond that threshold. Zach was thinking of calling her, but the wind started to blow hard enough that it probably wouldn't have been much of a conversation, even if she picked up. He was still 15 minutes from the car when the first raindrops began to fall. Zach thought he'd be able to see it coming, but the rain surprised him. He wasn't supposed to run, but he wasn't supposed to get struck by lightning either. There was a brief, heavy burst of soaking rain that came in a wave and then stopped. As he ran, Zach could taste the pungent aroma of sage in the air. It was so strong he found himself coughing, gagging almost. Moist dirt and desert sage. Lightning started flashing closer and closer as he ran. Then, as the run became a sprint, minutes from the car, the heavens opened.
Why do you have to do the work?
Tess Lazaro asked him the next time they met. She didn't even seem to want to know about the walk, nor did she care to know about the thoughts he'd had on his own tendency to run as a way to punish himself. What work? The Mars mission, you mean?
Yes. Why does it need to be you up there, Deals?
From the standpoint of humanity, I suppose it doesn't, Zach answered her. Eno will do a good job up there. There are probably 10 people at Atlas who could complete the training and execute the mission competently.
So would it be fair to say it's something you're insisting on for your own sake?
Is that a bad thing?
What do you think, Deals?
Are you asking me about my ego? Whether it's too big or something? I must be the one? Tess Lazaro shrugged.
I told you I worked with athletes. They all want to win. A lot of them can't tell me why with any real understanding of what drives them.
Other than not losing? I mean, who the hell likes to lose?
That's a totally reasonable motivation. Is it yours?
You want an honest answer, Tess?
I definitely don't want a dishonest one. That wouldn't do any good for anyone.
We live once. All we get are the talents we're born with and the opportunity to refine, improve upon, and use those talents, if we're lucky. Why the hell would you waste your life by failing to maximize the opportunities that are given to you?
That's a powerful perspective. So Mars maximizes your talents?
I'm not sure of anything bigger or more useful I could be doing with myself than advancing humanity's reach in space. Do you have any better suggestions, Tess?
Not for an astronaut.
And why did your athletes play? If they didn't compete, lace up their shoes or skates or whatever, somebody else would have taken their roster spot, and the games would have gone on still. All the greatest players retire when they get old. New superstars emerge.
That's true.
Did you ever ask them?
Sure. I got many different answers for that, Deals. There were a lot of young men who couldn't say at first. Most of them grew up playing and didn't know what else to do for a living. For almost all the young men I counseled, it was the best opportunity by far. Fame, money, prestige. Those are powerful motivations for a 20-year-old young man.
Or a 60-year-old man, for that matter, Tess.
True enough, yeah. A lot of my work, though, was with older players figuring out the back end, transitioning to the next chapter of their life. That's when they usually started asking questions about why the game was so important to them. A lot of them struggled when it was no longer an option.
I'll pass on that session. Thanks, Tess. I'm just getting started here.
So what did you figure out on your walk then, Zach?
I figured out how I failed.
Care to enlighten me?
You don't want to take my word for it?
It would help me to explain to your bosses what's going on with you.
I ran that loop that morning as a result of the bad news, an emotional decision. Then, because I was doing it for the wrong reasons, I ran through some red flags because I wasn't prepared to stack another small failure on top of the biggest failure of my life. You should never put yourself in a position where you can't back down when it's the right decision.
That simple?
Nothing's that simple, but those are the big pieces.
So here's the real question, Deals. What are you going to do about it?
Zach Deals paused and took a deep breath. What to say? Tess was far too smart to buy a line of bullshit. I can't go back in time and undo it, Tess. I'm going to focus on today and tomorrow and the things I can change. She pressed him with a long look. When he didn't bite, she asked outright.
That's it.
Deals shrugged. That's the best I can do. Back to work.
Okay, Deals. I can't make you break it down for me if you don't want to.
Deals didn't respond.
Anything else?
She asked him. For now, no. Like I said, I'm just ready to get back to work, make plans for my next moves here at Atlas, prepare to apply as Eno Clark's alternate. At first, Badgley wasn't receptive. Zach admitted he'd messed up. But when he told her his biggest mistake in the chain of bad decisions, she began to hear him out. I should have called you first. I was going to do it either way, but I needed you on my team that morning. I wouldn't have ended up in the hospital. I guess I just thought it was too much to ask of you at that point in our relationship. Badgley thought Deals was asking more now. Atlas was already watching him, and now he wanted her to sit in the car for 5 hours while he tried to do the same run again. What would Atlas think of that if they found out? It won't happen, he assured her. I'll plan it better. I'll have you on the line to talk to through the whole run. You can monitor me from the drone, fly me fluids and energy bars, and we can do it in the dark when it's cool.
I have a schedule too, Zach.
We'll do it by yours, whenever it fits in best, Badgley.
I'll have to think about it.
Badgley did think about it, and for no short period of time. Deals told her to take all the time she needed. Her focus had been on qualifying for lunar service, something Deals had both been helping her with and pushing her toward. He didn't push her decision about the run, though. The only conversation they'd had about it over several weeks was a brief one, when he was getting ready for an early day at work one morning. She asked him why it was so important to him. I like to fix my mistakes, he replied, regardless of the cost. Ultimately, the reason Badgley eventually agreed was that Zach was asking for her help. She'd known him long enough to know he didn't do that easily. They talked through a plan, prepared, and waited for a hole in Badgley's schedule that worked for both of them. They were both early risers, so for the two of them to get up at 3 wasn't that much of a stretch. The moon was nearly full, and the sky was perfectly desert clear, with almost no light pollution out there. Just the moon, the stars, and the cool blue reflection of the night landscape. Zach felt strong heading up the first pitch. Badgley had her laptop, glasses, and everything she needed for a long study session. The drone didn't have enough life in it to stay up for the duration, but it easily had a few supply drops in it. Hit me with your questions as I go, Zach stated as he climbed. If I can't answer them, it means I'm getting lightheaded.
Funny.
Badgley's voice came over his earpiece.
Watch your footing out there, Zach.
What a night, he replied, as his feet churned under him on that first ascent. No place on earth I'd rather be. She knew. Or at least she knew something had changed when she saw him for their last session. Zach had officially been offered the alternate slot for Eno Clark's position on Catarix in the interim. But it was more than that, she knew. That had been his expectation from the outset, at least as long as their sessions went well. For the most part, they had. Dr. Teslazaro had no glaring concerns about Zach Deals.
So do you want to tell me, Deals?
She asked him. About what? He grinned.
You haven't figured out that these eyes don't miss much.
I'm just glad it's our last mandated session.
Ouch,
Tess replied, smiling back at him.
Seriously though, Deals, what's up?
Badgley and I got engaged.
Really?
Yeah, really.
That's good. You guys haven't been together that long, though. You must feel good about it, judging from the look of you.
I feel great. Deals took a deep breath and a long pause before he spoke again. Great.
I'm happy for you both. That's a big step.
One giant leap.
Oh,
she laughed.
Astronaut humor. Nice.
Walked right into it.
So Deals,
Tess Lazaro said earnestly.
I hope you know I'll be here for you whenever you need to talk. Personal, professional, whatever.
I appreciate it, he replied. You've been a genuine help these past few weeks.
I'm glad to hear it.
And you can say you knew me once I get to Mars.
I'll be proud on that day, Deals.
I promise I won't keep you waiting too long, Dr. Lazaro.
I don't doubt it.
Anything else for me today, Tess? She looked at him as though she knew, smiled as though she was in on it, and maybe she did know. Maybe she knew and she liked it. That alpha swagger. The fact that Zach Deals was absolutely incapable of leaving a blemish on his score sheet. Or maybe she just genuinely liked him.
Good luck to you and Badgley.
Deals had just left the sauna. It was the first time he'd been that hot since his fateful run to Railroad Ridge. He'd only stayed in the steam for a few minutes and stepped out the second his head started to feel hot. Deals hadn't realized how late it had gotten. The top crew was coming in to begin their aquatic training that evening. Zach hadn't seen any of them since the selection weeks prior, but they were all going to be in the building for the next few months, and he and the second crew were going to need to fall in behind them. Deals spotted Miles Kaneda in the locker room as he came in. He'd never met Kaneda in person before, but Zach had seen his communications on logs before, as well as videos and training materials. He was taller than Zach expected, slim, fit, dressed in a nice tailored suit. He looked almost like a lawyer dressed like that. He was taking off his tie at an open locker and turned around when Zach approached. Miles Kaneda seemed to recognize Zach, even red and sweating, coming out of the steam like that. You're Deals, right? Kaneda said, reaching out a hand. Miles Kaneda. Nice to meet you. Zach reached out and shook it. Kaneda had a warm smile, which Zach found surprising, having only seen Miles in recordings, where he came off as a little cold. Smart, but cold. But in person, he looked Deals in the eyes and seemed genuinely glad to meet. Zach Deals, he replied. Congratulations on getting the Catarix. To you and your wife, I guess. That's great for you both. Yeah, sure beats staying at home while she's up there. Or vice versa. Jimena never would have let me hear the end of that. It's an exciting mission. Hey, I read a few of your papers on plasma flow Deals. It's excellent work. I'd love to pick your brain on the magnetics while we're overlapping here in the next couple months. Fusion rocketry is definitely not my strongest area. Zach laughed. It was quite a statement coming from Miles Kaneda, Mr. Polymath. I could say the same thing about 10 different areas you're an expert in myself, Deals replied, but I'd be happy to talk. That's great. I'm glad we'll be working together. You know, Eno was an excellent candidate, and he'll be a great asset up there. But your time's coming, Deals. I fully expect to see you up on the Alpha site when you relieve us in a couple years. Hopefully you guys have built us a 5-star resort in that lava tube by then, Kaneda. He laughed. I'll put in a request for a sauna for you. I'm going to need one if I do get up there. Something's got to fill the gap if I can't go for a decent run. I doubt the Martian treadmill is going to cut it. Maybe not, but that's a trade-off I'm sure you'll be worrying about soon enough. You'll get there, brother. Thanks, Kaneda, Deals replied. I gotta run if I'm going to catch the Ares launch. Badgley's going up for Luna tonight. Badgley? He seemed to be searching his memory for her name, coming up short. Badgley Pignon, my fiancée. She's been a junior flight specialist in the Neo group. Oh, and she's on the Ares tonight? Good for her. Is she up there for a bit? 3 months. First rotation on the moon? Yeah, she's ecstatic. That's great, Deals. Good for you too. He was nodding his head, hanging his suit jacket on the hook inside his locker. I'll see you around, Miles. It was great to finally meet you. Have a good night. You too, Zach, Kaneda said as Deals headed off toward the showers. He didn't see Eno Clark arrive to the training center that evening, but he saw their group through the glass getting geared up by the aquatics tank on his way out. Zach's crew, the alternates, were on the second training rotation, starting their aquatics work the following week. Zach Deals would be ready. He knew something could come up, and he could be called up at any time. Space travel was unpredictable. Life was unpredictable. Deals didn't linger at the glass as the Catarix crew put on their gear. He had to catch Badgley in the pen before her crew headed out to the pad. It was going to be a long evening in the LC before the Ares lifted off, and a long 3 months before he finally welcomed her home again. The Alternate. This has been an original story, written and read by P.E. Rowe. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this story. If you're enjoying the channel and you enjoyed today's story, I'd humbly ask that you leave a like on today's video, as it helps the channel to grow and reach more sci-fi fans like you. In the past few months, I've been adding sound effects to stories here and there, last week's story Mega Sushi being one such example. I've gotten feedback, both positive and negative, and I didn't really have a great sense for how many people were enjoying or not enjoying the change. So I've put up a poll on the post tab on the YouTube channel. If you have a feeling one way or the other, I'd love to have your input. I figured, why rely on my vague impression of how the audience is feeling when I could just ask? That poll will be up for a little while after this story's release, and I definitely appreciate your feedback. I hope you enjoyed today's short story teaser for Mother Mars. This story precedes the novel itself, which will follow the crew of Catarix on their actual Mars mission. Today's story was partly inspired by the story of Barbara Morgan, who was famously the alternate for Krista McAuliffe aboard Challenger in 1986, and she continued on to a lifelong career as an educator, astronaut, and ambassador for humanity's ambitions in space. Part of the challenge of a teaser short like this one is that it can't reveal too much of the upcoming novel without spoiling the story, so I opted to keep the focus on the tremendous amount of work that goes into making it to a mission like the Catarix Mars mission for every last crew member, and even the ones who don't make it inside the launch vehicle. Rest assured though, in the novel, you'll get to know the whole Catarix crew very well. So I thought I'd take this opportunity as this story begins to set the stage for Mother Mars, to talk a little bit about what's been taking us so long to get this story out. And I think the short answer to that is that Alec and I both, at just about every turn, totally underestimated the scope of the project. Which, speaking for myself alone, I'm totally happy about in hindsight. I think if I'd had any sense of the commitment at the outset, I'd almost certainly have chosen not to work on it. And I think I'd have regretted that decision immensely. But the story was extremely challenging to write, intricate, complex, multi-layered, and, I hope, will prove to be both meaningful and timely when we finally get it published. At some point in the process, Alec proposed and spearheaded the idea of a full cast recording, which similarly seemed like a great idea that neither of us had ever done before, and though I knew how much work a single-track audiobook recording would be for a novel, I had no sense of the added challenge here either. Alec and I have both spent countless hours editing the audio in the past year, bi-coastally, which is to say nothing of the challenge of casting about a dozen voice actors from multiple continents, mixing all their different audio, and asking for re-recordings on segments, lines, edits, and then having to remix the new audio to match. And, by necessity, we've been doing a lot of this in our spare hours while keeping our main projects going in the foreground. Thankfully, I can say confidently that we are finally down to the point where the audio drama is near completion, a matter of a few weeks rather than months. If I have a single regret, it's how consistently wrong I've been about where I thought we stood. I feel like I've been promising something forever now, that if I put myself in a listener's shoes, must feel like it will never arrive. So in the spirit of complete transparency, our release date may be a few months from the time the audio is finally completed, as Alec and I explore all our options in terms of the best way to publish the story to ensure it reaches as broad an audience as possible. All that said, having just gone through the complete vocal track recently again, I still feel as strongly as I have at any point in the project that it'll be a story we'll both be extremely proud to share, and one that will hold up over time. So for all of you who've been patiently waiting, thank you for your patience. We're getting very close, and I hope to be sharing a release date with you soon. And for those of you who long ago volunteered to be reviewers, I haven't forgotten about you. You're still on the list, and will be the first to hear the story when it's ready. In other news, next week, The Misfits return with episode 34, and it's a big one. Our friend Fieldstone has been trying to piece together his memories of his time as a bipal, and he's finally ready to talk. So if you've been following The Misfits, that's one you're definitely not going to want to miss. I'd like to thank everyone who helped boost last week's story by hyping, liking, commenting, and sharing. If you're enjoying these stories, please help spread the word. The more people we have along for the ride, the longer these crazy adventures will be assured to continue. If you'd like to support in other ways, books and audiobooks are always a great way, either for your collection or as a gift to a fellow sci-fi fan. If you'd like to tip the storyteller, there's a link to my support page in the description. We'll be back again next week with another new sci-fi story. Until then, thank you for listening. This has been P.E. Rowe, and we'll see you next time.